We're in trances, going all to different places, different planets. Watch your aura pass me by, losing balance. What if we run out of time and second chances? Empty-handed, you left fast high.
Thank you for watching Let's Talk with Sandra. Today, I have the honor and privilege of interviewing the current mayor of Gary, Indiana, Mayor Jerome Prince. Should I call you Mr. Mayor, Jerome Prince? How should I address you today?
First
Mayor?
of all, I want you to be as comfortable as I am right now. It's humbling that you hold me as such high regard and esteem. But for today, you can call me Jerome or Mayor or Mayor Prince, whatever.
I'll say Mayor Jerome. I like Mayor Jerome.
Okay, that's fair. Fair enough.
So first of all, I want to thank you for agreeing to have this conversation with me. It's kind of hot in here, but we're going to walk through it.
I thought it was just me, but yeah, we'll make it.
And as always, I'll start with, you were born in Gary, Indiana. Could you tell me where you were born, what year?
I'll share the whole story with you. So, Sandra, I was born right here in Gary, Indiana at the original Methodist Hospital facility. I say original because over the years, there's certainly been additions made to it. But when I was younger, I wanted to know exactly which room I was born in.
Really?
I did. And as it turns out, she didn't remember the exact room, but she knows that it was on the Grant Street side. And so I've sort of made my own impression of what I believe the room to be, and certainly have shared that story with my children and grandchildren.
Okay, so you were born in Gary, Indiana, what year?
1964.
1964.
Great year.
Great year.
Yes.
Tell me a little about your mom and dad.
Wow, that's a pretty good question. So where should I start? Sandra, it's a long story.
Are they originally from Gary, Indiana?
That's a long story also. So
let's talk.
Yes and no, maybe. So let's start from this context. I was born Abner Jerome Marshall.
Really?
Absolutely. 1964, August 16th at 11. Actually, it was just after 12 because she went into labor on the 15th, but it was very late at night. And because I believe it was something like 12:07 a.m., that is, it became the 16th. And so, but yeah, my birth name was Abner Jerome Marshall.
Really?
Marshall because that was my mother's maiden name. She was an unwed 18-year-old mother, if you will.
Really?
Abner comes from my great-grandfather, and I also had an uncle who fought in World War I. Unfortunately, he didn't return, but his name was Abner also, and it was a great family name. Believe it or not, it was a name that I never embraced as a kid because during that time, and anyone who is familiar with the era of 1964, certainly, or, somewhere in that area, they probably, when they hear the name Abner, they think of this cartoon that was printed in the paper. And again, the cartoon actually wasn't a relative when I was a young guy. In fact, I never saw it in any of the papers. But I guess just prior to me being born, there was a cartoon called Little Abner, if you will. My reference to the name Abner came from a sitcom that I used to watch weekly called Bewitched, if you will. And there was Mrs. Kravitz, and her husband's name was Abner. And so the name for me was a little uncomfortable because it was always the subject of some ridicule or joke. And people called me everything but Abner. But in any event, I started school in 1968 in preschool. And I almost remember it like it was yesterday when I asked my mother to change my name.
Really?
Yeah, I did. I did not want to start school with that name after hearing this mockery from my relatives and the people around.
How old were you?
I was about 4 years old, 4.5 years old, sure. And to that extent, she acquiesced and she inverted my first and middle name. So I became Jerome Abner Marshall.
Oh, wow.
But in 1968, her boyfriend from high school, who she had dated throughout high school, came home from the Marine Corps, ironically, and they sort of reconnected, and they were married prior to me turning 5 years old.
Wow.
And his name was David Prince. And so that's how once they got married, he adopted me, and I became Jerome Abner Prince.
Prince. That's where the name Prince came from. No one, I never would have thought.
No one, really does. And in a strange sort of sense, I believe in fate and destiny. Absolutely. It was almost as if that name was made for me. At least I feel like that anyway.
Absolutely.
Ironically, my son, I have a Jerome Abner Prince Jr., and he has a son also, the third, but they love the name Abner, and they've certainly embraced it. And so from a familial perspective, it's something that I've certainly come to grips with after 58 years. But the fact that my kids love the name and embrace it certainly is a way to cherish, if you will, and honor that family legacy
honor your
of the name Abner.
Who gave his life for this country.
Absolutely.
But as kids, we don't know that.
Absolutely.
You know? Or you would have held on to that name.
For sure.
With pride, but you do now.
For sure.
So where in Gary were you raised?
So initially, when my mom birthed me, our first home was at her mother's house, which was 19th and Martin Luther King Drive. And at that time, it was still a gravel road.
Wow. And
it was called Indiana Street.
Really?
Yeah. And then shortly thereafter, sometime right around 66 or 67, they changed it to Martin Luther King Street. And of course, it was certainly a main thoroughfare and a way of getting from the north end of town to the south end.
Martin Luther King Street was?
Oh, absolutely. It was definitely.
Not Broadway?
Well, you've got many main streets, but that was a main thoroughfare.
Really?
And still is today. Most people who are familiar with the city and live on the east side of town, I would imagine, traverse it daily, if not, multiple times a day. Yes. In fact, I was over there today in that area. But yeah. And so you ask were my parents originally from Gary. Yeah. None of them were. My mom, actually, her family, my grandmother had, at the time, my mother moved here in 1956. I believe my grandmother had 11 children at that time. She did. Pretty close. Yeah, it was 11 of them. And then the last one was born in Gary, Indiana. But they moved to a 3-bedroom home, a little less than 1,000 square feet. And if you can imagine that, 12 kids and parents in a less than 1,000 square foot home.
Wow.
But, it's those beginnings and those humble beginnings, I think, that influenced my mother the most.
Yes.
And always resulted in her striving for better in her life, and certainly striving for better for her children and offspring.
How many kids did your mother have besides you?
So there was, first set was my brother and I, and we had a little sister that was born a year after my brother. She died at about 18 months old, crib death or sudden infant death is what they called it. But then later in life, I believe, when I was about 13 years old, she remarried and she had a couple other children. Okay. So I have now 2 brothers and a sister. Okay. But my younger brother and sister are more like my children because they're the same age as my children. Yes. And in many regards, I'm sure they hold me in the same esteem as more of a parental figure than a brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That is something. Where did you go to school? Let's start with elementary.
Elementary school. So since we're talking about elementary, let me give a shout out to a couple of teachers of mine that are still here with us.
Yes.
And actually, I ran into one of them again. I see them occasionally at the different events around the city.
Yes.
Both of them are still very, very active.
Wow.
And just great people. And they always tell me how proud they am of me. And I would imagine being a teacher, it's sort of a great feeling to see students that you raise. And listen, we're talking in these two instances, one of them over 50 years later, and certainly one of them pretty close. But my kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Joan Price. I just ran into her Sunday, and she's in great physical and mental shape, and great spirit. And then my third grade teacher was Mrs. Holliday.
Wow.
I run into her often as well. Her name is Mrs. Purnell now.
Mrs.
She remarried.
Mrs. Holliday, you can give her a shout out, Mrs. Holliday.
Yeah, but I think it's an honor for me in many regards to be able to interact with them, and then to have them view me in a respectful light now. But there's one other teacher who was my junior English teacher, who's followed me all throughout my career once I returned from the Marine Corps.
Right.
And in fact, she's very engaged in the activities of the city and certainly campaigns that I run also. And that's Mrs. Lonnie Durrell.
Really?
Yep.
That is something. So what elementary school would that have been?
That was Drew School, Charles R. Drew School. And do you know anything about Charles R. Drew?
No, I don't.
So as a kid, we certainly learned the origin and the history of the names of our school. Charles R. Drew was a heart surgeon. He was an African American.
Really?
And if I'm not mistaken, as history goes, he was probably the first African American heart surgeon. But certainly the first prominent one, the first one that we learned of. But I attended Charles R. Drew School somewhere right around, I think I was in the fourth grade. I was right around 9 years old. My parents, my mother and David Prince, who she married, they actually divorced in 1973, and my mother moved to Glen Park.
Okay.
And that was probably the point where she decided that she was going to sacrifice and invest a little bit more in her children's future. Yes. And so I recall her working a couple of jobs to be able to send me to a private school, which was actually a Catholic school at the time, St. Mark's in Glen Park.
Wow.
And from there, she moved to, a few years later, she moved to the Miller area, and I attended St. Mary of the Lake.
Wow.
And ultimately went to high school at Andrean High, which was the Catholic high school. Sandra, the interesting part about it is all throughout that, I always wanted to go to school with my friends and the people who lived in the community. In fact, I was the only kid in the neighborhood who attended those schools. But in any event, somewhere right around my junior year, in fact, it was the middle of my junior year, she finally acquiesced and allowed me to transfer into a public school.
Wow.
I like to tell the story or suggest that I was the wiser of the two because, as you know, or you may not know, that's actually where I met Deanna in high school. I was a senior by the time I met her.
What high school would have that?
That was Lew Wallace High School. Yes, that's the one I graduated from. And so met Deanna her junior year, my senior year. And about a little bit more than a year and a half afterwards, we were married. Yes.
So you transferred to Lew Wallace. You graduated.
I did.
Then you got married.
That would be accurate.
How old were you?
18.
You got married at 18.
Yes, and she was 17. In fact, her dad had to sign for her.
Really?
Yes.
We're gonna go back to that conversation.
Okay.
Yes, because I like the love stories.
But it's awesome because then I could share that recently we just celebrated our 40th anniversary as well.
Absolutely, sure. So. Absolutely. But once you graduated from high school, you married. What did you do next?
So it wasn't immediately after graduating. I actually, almost immediately after graduating, I shipped off to the Marine Corps. In fact, before I had graduated, I had already decided that that was going to be the path that I was going to take. And I enlisted about 10 months before graduating. They called the Early Enlistment Program. But in any event, so I went to boot camp and came home for a leave, went to infantry training, came back on another leave, and that's when I married Deanna, and we've been together ever since.
Yes. My youngest son, whom I lost February 7th of 2018, also made that decision to join the Marine when he was 16. So when he graduated, a week later, he shipped off to boot camp and actually turned 18 in boot camp.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, I'm sure you were proud of him.
So you know, I'm a supporter of our veterans and the military anyhow, but I'm even a greater supporter of the Marine because there's just something, you know. And I go back and I always say this: it takes a very special kind of person with a special heart to make that unselfish decision at a young age to say, I'm going to join the military to serve my country, because in doing that, they already know that if they have to go to war, they may not make it home. So to me, for any branch of the military, that's an ultimate unselfish sacrifice. So I honor all veterans and all military personnel just for that thing, you know? Not to say that others aren't, but that's just that ultimate sacrifice.
So that's very thoughtful and kind of you. And personally speaking, I've seen you interact with military and the veterans in your work here in the community. And so I know that to be certain. You know, again, it's humbling to hear and to just understand. Thank you. Just to know that people acknowledge it and certainly hold it in high regards is, you know, it's a humbling proposition. For me, I don't know that it was necessarily the desire to serve my country that led me down that path. Well, my dad was a Marine, as I mentioned earlier. And so in terms of the branch that I ultimately decided, that was an easy decision. For me, it was the fact that I was a young parent and I wanted to, I'm sorry?
You already had a child.
I did. While in high school.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I was getting busy. Yeah, well, you asked for the truth, right?
Absolutely.
But I've always been responsible and certainly ready to step up to my responsibility and addressing it. But yeah, I had a son already.
Wow.
And so the focus was to be able to provide the best opportunity, certainly insurance and whatever other opportunities that I could provide for him and certainly my family, right? And so that was the motivating factor. But once I got there, all of the history and the nostalgia of my dad being a Marine, and once you get there, and you stand on those yellow footprints, whether it's something that you have embraced or not, those drill instructors have a way of getting you to step in shape and embrace it pretty quickly. But so it was an experience that I absolutely relished and enjoyed. But yeah, the motivating factor was certainly an opportunity to provide for my family. In fact, entering high school, or not necessarily high school, but my senior year, I was largely convinced that I was going to take a different path and attend college.
Yes.
But as it got a little bit closer, and maybe it was that newfound freedom of being in public school, that just inspired me to take a different path. And it's something that I certainly have no regrets about. Absolutely. And it was one of the greatest experiences of my life.
My grandmother always says that that God appoints. We always think we know what we want.
Sure.
And we have it all planned out, but that may not have been the path that God wanted for you. So whatever path it is, it was the right path.
I believe that. I believe that wholeheartedly. In fact, when I think about my service now, and particularly the challenging aspects of my present elected role, I often wonder, how did I get here, or why did I choose this path? And certainly there are 1,000 other things that I could have done that would have resulted in maybe a little less stress and sometimes anxiety. But my wife often reminds me that, as you just suggested, that it's not my doing. There's definitely a higher power. Absolutely. And to that extent, I use the analogy that my favorite uncle shared with me once. And he told me that I'm on an assignment and that I have to complete whatever assignment that's been given to me. And so when we come upon those challenging days, and I'll be honest with you, I mean, there's days where, I really contemplate what the future may hold and which direction I should go in relative to being an elected official. But I hear his words that resonate in my ear, and he says, Jerome, you have to finish the assignment. And so to that extent, I embrace all of the challenges that exist. I embody the spirit of Gary, and just sharing some of my humble beginnings and background with you. I am Gary. I am the people of Gary. And so to that extent, I'm definitely determined to finish this assignment.
Absolutely. And I absolutely agree. I'm going to go back to, and I'm going to go back to you being in the military. Where were you stationed?
I was stationed in Concord, California, ultimately on a naval weapons base. But my original assignment was at Camp Pendleton in Southern California. What
was your job?
So originally, it was 0311, which is infantry. But right after infantry training, or actually during that, we got an opportunity to put in what they called a wish list, right? And again, as a young father and a newly married husband, my first focus and priority was to be with my family. And most Marines, certainly those who were in infantry, ultimately ended up having to do a tour in Japan for either a year or 18 months. And that was something that I didn't even want to contemplate. I didn't want to be away from my family that long. As a young Marine, and certainly not having attained any significant rank that would have helped to increase the that I received, and just being so young, I couldn't grasp the thought of going to Japan and the expense associated with trying to bring my family over. And so I put in a request to stay stateside. And I'm probably one of the only Marines in history that actually got his request honored. Sure, as once you sign up in the military, I mean, you take whatever's given or assigned to you.
Absolutely.
But I was fortunate enough to obtain a secondary MOS of security specialist, if you will.
Yes.
And so I was stationed on a naval weapons station in Concord, California, which was right outside of Oakland and near San Francisco and in the Napa Valley area. And so it was a great tour of duty. And
how many years were you on that base?
I stayed one term in the Marine Corps totally. I was on that base about 2.5, almost 3 years.
Okay.
One duty station, yes.
And you brought your family?
Absolutely.
And they loved it. Your wife loved it. I love it.
She did. We were kids. I mean, we were in California. That was the first time that we had ever gone to California. But just to be together and have a family unit together, I'm certain was something that she appreciated. And as I think back on it, we definitely had a lot of good times.
Yes. And how many kids maybe did you all have?
4, ultimately. I was thinking about then. They're all 3 years apart.
Oh, wow.
They're all 3 years apart.
Okay.
So
boys, girls?
All boys.
All boys.
Yes.
Not horrible, but for a man to have all boys, it's like
I can relate to that. That's exactly how I felt as a young father. That was probably one of the greatest things that was happening in my life, is that I had an opportunity to be an influence to 4 male, right? And certainly be their role model and their example. And, but listen, Deanna played a huge integral role in that. In fact, I was much like my dad, strict disciplinarian, because I certainly didn't have a roadmap or blueprint and considering the age. And I'm certain that I made a lot of mistakes along the way, but one of the things that I was always determined to do is ensure that they didn't become a part of the status quo, if you will. And so in some regards, in many regards, I'm sure I was very, very tough on them. But Deanna was always that soft, loving touch. And we sort of neutralized each other or equalized each other, if you will. And it was a great thing.
When is her birthday?
April 10th. It's coming up soon. Yes.
And he said it. Right?
Absolutely.
That's amazing. Oh, and as you said, from age 18 to age 56.
58. I'll be 59 this year.
Married to that same love.
Yes.
That is awesome. That is so honorable, especially in our society. And I say our because so very often, like myself, we don't no longer have the history of African American couples being together for a long period of time.
Unfortunately, that is the case, but it affects all nationalities and races, and it takes a lot of work to make a marriage work, and certainly. Absolutely. When you couple the different societal pressures and environments, it's challenging. I attribute the longevity mostly to Deanna. Well, sure, she's an incredible person, and although we both have been committed to this marriage, I'm certain that there were times where, she may have considered, man, what am I doing here, right? But in any event, the respect certainly was always there.
Absolutely.
And we toughed it out. We made it through, and she's just as committed, and we're just as committed to each other today, and even more so because now we understand, and we understand the benefit of us staying together, because now we get the luxury of not only watching our adult sons thrive. But now we have 11 grandchildren.
That's beautiful.
And in my opinion, it's an opportunity. It's a second chance, if you will, to instill good in someone else, and hopefully that continues, and they certainly remember the life lessons and the experiences. And when they have children and grandchildren, I think that's how you change the world. You know, you start immediately with your unit or the people that you have the most influence and impact on, and you try to set good examples. And you know, to that extent, I think at the very minimum, it's certainly a great start in a recipe. But at some point, people, much like myself, figure their own individual aspirations out, and they certainly pursue it. I guarantee you, my mother definitely didn't want me to go to the Marine Corps or to the military. She probably, there's no probably to it, she wanted me to attend college. And she certainly didn't want me to have a kid, right, or child, right, out of wedlock in high school. And I can absolutely assure you, she definitely didn't want me to get married at 18 years old, you know. But I've always sort of been a strong-willed, independent type of person, and I've just got this desire to do it my way, and not that, you know, it's all me. As I said earlier, there's certainly a higher power that guides us. We may not acknowledge it or give it all the respect and credit, you know, that higher power deserves. But the point is that at some point, you know, we all have this will. We have free will. We have the luxury and the ability to make our own choices. And we certainly build on the experiences and the examples that were set before us. But at some point, you have to chart your course. And I decided to chart mine very early, but always with a sense of responsibility and certainly accountability. And it exists with me today, you know, in terms of my approach in being an elected official. Sure.
Once you came out of the military, how did you get into, what was your next job? Let's say that.
So came out of the military at 22. No. When I was 22.
Oh, wow.
Sure. And so that would have had to be 1986 at that time. And to that extent, government or being an elected official actually didn't enter my life until about 8 years later.
Really?
And even at that time, I really had no desire or aspiration to be an elected official. In fact, and I inject, you know, references to my mother because obviously she was a huge influence in my life as well. But she was the one who was completely engaged and enthralled, if you will, into government and politics. In fact, she belonged to several civic organizations, NAACP, Urban League, Sickle Cell, and she used to always carry us along, you know. And I recall conversations with her where I would want to go out with those kids who went to the public school, and, you know, I'd be in doing my homework from, you know, our school, but she would always tell me that I can't be over here or I can't do this because one day you could be the mayor of this city. And it is when you think about it, because at that time I thought she was delusional, or I thought she was crazy, to be honest with you. Yeah, because I had no desire to be, first of all, and it was just my opinion, just based on what I thought I saw and observed, that families like ours didn't represent or ascend to roles of elected officials or someone.
And what do you mean when you say family like ours?
Well, again, and you can kind of connect the dots. They moved to Gary in '56. I got a grandmother, right, who's, you know, she's married, but her and her husband aren't really together. So she's raising 12 kids in a 1,000-square-foot home, and she has to travel back and forth to Chicago, right, in order to for employment, if you will. She was a housemaker or a homekeeper, a maid, for the lack of a better word. Sure. And so there were a lot of times where those kids, even though some of them were teenagers and that, but they were raising themselves in that house. And so to that extent, we just, there's an adage of being on one side of the track or the other.
Yes.
I mean, if there is such a thing, we certainly, our family or her family would have been on that other side of the track, and I just didn't think that families like that ascended to positions of anything that was of status. And so, amen. And so as it turns out, she was right, but somewhere right around 1994, actually it was in 94, I started working for the local assessor's office.
I'll ask you this,
yes,
before we go into that.
That's okay.
When you came back from the military, and you came back to Gary?
Yes.
What did you think of Gary? What did you see?
That's a great question. So we didn't come back immediately. We stayed in Concord or Vallejo, California for a while. But my wife's dad became ill, and to that extent, she was very close to him, and she wanted to come back, and so we did. And I recall getting off the highway around 30 see what
Yeah.
so when I got to Gary, I got to tell you, I was largely surprised. And a lot of it has to do with just lack of understanding and knowledge of how processes and just things were actually occurring in our city. I didn't understand the economy very much, and I certainly didn't understand what impact or what significant impact the downward trajectory that the mills were taking would have on a city like this. So I remember coming back, and it appeared that things weren't as good as they were 4 years when I had left, right? And I'm sorry, we're talking 1986. It was like the late fall, like November of 86. And I recall seeing some businesses that had shuttered, a few abandoned buildings, but it just looked slightly desolate. And I remember my wife and I having a conversation about would the city ever return to prominence? And if so, what would be the time associated with that, and how would it occur? And again, I didn't have very much knowledge of these processes, but sort of intuitively, I predicted that it would be at the very minimum about 30 years. And I thought that at that time it was going to take significant investment from outside of the community. And here we are some 40 years later, if you will. And I believe that we're on the cusp of that, but we certainly still have a long way to go. And all of those factors are really what compelled me to begin to seek office in 1999, and certainly definitely part of why I ultimately decided to seek the office of mayor. It wasn't to minimize the efforts of any administrations prior to me, but I felt that what we needed most of all was structure. I think we needed to address the very foundation of the city, from the way that we deliver the services that we're supposed to the way that we interact with each other. And those were all the things that I think I became it motivated me, but not only that, it was always something that I strive to set an example of how things should be done. And to that extent, I just felt the greatest example or the best opportunity to set that example would be from the office of the mayor. And at least at the very minimum, we could begin to restructure the foundation of our city from the inside out.
But prior to becoming the mayor, what positions did you hold in Gary?
That's a great question. So no positions, but I've had several employment opportunities. Sure. I was a real estate agent. I was an insurance agent. Insurance first, right?
Selling insurance?
Yes. As soon as I got back, that was actually my first job that I took. I was an insurance agent for a few years. I then went to the assessor's office, and from there I obtained my real estate license. And so while working at the assessor's office, I learned a little bit more about the real estate industry. But what I discovered even more then is that there was a need for a change in perhaps our elected representation.
Yes.
And again, not to minimize the efforts of anyone who served in any office before me, but one thing that certainly was prevalent is at the time that I decided to run for office in 1999, I was 34 years old, about to be 35 that year. And there were no elected officials in the entire Lake County that were in my generational demographic. And so that's what really motivated me too, because I thought, again, this was an opportunity to set an example for my peers, if you will. And listen, I'm not saying that I'm the greatest person in the world and everybody should follow me, but I think people do look to others for inspiration and direction, and certainly as examples. And I thought, what a great platform, right? A very public facing platform to set this example, right? Of how an elected official should interact or at least represent his person or his constituents. And so we were successful the first time out. And in some regards, as I look at it 23 years later, a couple of things have happened. There are a number of younger persons showing a lot more interest in government now. And I think that's never been more prevalent than it is now. Right. But in addition to that, I believe that folks in my generation, certainly my peers, the ones I went to school with and worked with in some instances, I believe that in some regards, perhaps it made them take a second look and a different view of government, if you will, if for no other reason they saw someone who resembled them in office. And to that extent, you know, it's been an honor to serve. And if I've made just a little bit of difference, right, in the city and in the lives of someone else, I would have done something that's bigger than me, you, and Mr. Cameraman over here.
You know,
Mr. Jamal, Mr. Jamal. Is. Yes.
That's fine. I identify with what you're saying because, first of all, when I look at any elected official, the first thing we all see is character. You know, and I must say, I admire your character. I admire the way you love your wife. I admire the way you interact with people when you enter into a room. It's not like you're untouchable.
Right.
You know, and I have attended many different events in Gary where you were there. There were no cameras. There was no TV. You were just present.
Sure.
I remember when there were, last year, I believe it was, when there was a shooting, and there's not often a lot of shooting in Gary, so I'm just saying, there was a shooting, 2 shootings that occurred in Gary, and we had a prayer at my church, and you showed up. There was not an elected official there, but the mayor was there. There was no cameras, there was no fanfare, and sometimes when you ask to speak, you're so humble you don't even want to, but and I know
very observant of you. So not only that, to be honest with you, I don't really like the cameras and all that. I don't. I enjoy the governing side of this job,
Yes.
more so than the performance.
Yes.
Even now, as I talk to you, but you've made me very comfortable. And as I said, Jamal's doing a great job over here. But the point is I don't like the theater and the production part of it,
Absolutely.
you know, and particularly in a city such as ours that needs so much work.
Absolutely.
I think there's just more work to be done than we could possibly even imagine. And to that extent, I'm just glad that you were able to observe that. And
Yes,
I thank you for the acknowledgement.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Because I pay close attention to details.
You
have
do.
To do that.
You absolutely do.
I remember when the ministers that were doing a prayer at the gas station that the gentleman was shot at, and you came out, and your specific request was that there be no kind of media. That was so humbling to me, because that showed me that you were doing this from your heart.
Sure.
It wasn't about, let me get a photo op. It was that I care.
Right.
And that meant something to me. And at the same time, you had also lost your nephew.
He was actually a cousin of mine, second cousin. So he was the son of one of my first cousins, right? And I really didn't know the young man. In fact, someone notified me that he was my cousin. And so there was a couple days after that tragic incident.
Really?
It was 2 days afterwards before I learned that this guy was actually a cousin of mine.
Really?
Yeah. So, definitely.
So,
and it's, you know, tragic when it occurs to anyone's family. You know, one of the most unsettling things for me is, like many people, you turn on the news at night, and or either first thing in the morning is even worse than hearing it at night, right? Yes. And a significant portion of the initial broadcast is spent talking about how many people met some tragic fate the night before. And it just really, really, really makes you wonder what the heck is going on with people. But listen, far be it for me to judge anyone, but it's unsettling. And if it is for me, I know it has to be for certainly the people who are impacted directly by it. But I think about the others who aren't necessarily in positions to protect themselves, how vulnerable they must feel, like our seniors, right? Yes. And even the children, you know. When I was coming up, I don't recall knowing anybody who was the victim of a tragic episode.
Isn't that something?
I take that back. There was one person, and she was a young lady, about 14 years old, but that was probably the only.
Really?
And you know, when I look at my children's fate, or even Jamal, who appears to be somewhere near the age of at least one of my sons, and I'm thinking he's probably even younger than my youngest son, just considering, you know, the timeline there. My youngest son is 35. So I'm right on there, Jamal. Yeah. So the point is that these young people have an experience unlike no other. And I can't imagine, really. I can to an extent, but it's unconscionable to think what they must think. As a parent, I remember when my kids were approaching adulthood, and even when they were teens in you know, a city that's rapidly changing. I remember times where I would hear sirens and I'd automatically think about my sons, right? Oh yeah, it's a very, very unsettling feeling. And so I say all of that to say, as you know, public safety has been my top priority as a
Absolutely.
mayor.
Yes.
And it's not that I think the answer is policing and beating people up or
Absolutely.
arresting people, but I do think that people deserve to feel safe
Absolutely.
and secure in their environment. And I've always told my sons, as these things started to occur, you know, we would be outside at our home and they might hear something or something in the distance or a car revving by, and you can sense the tension, right, that they're experiencing. And I used to always tell them, listen, we're going to stay outside here because if we can't be safe in our own environment and this little 40 by 125 foot lot, then we are really in trouble.
Absolutely.
And so we began to ride our bikes around. I would take them with me, and I still ride with my grandchildren, because the point is, although those things exist, I still feel comfortable here in my city, and I'll travel anywhere. I ride my bike throughout the city, and sometimes people say, well, he doesn't have security with him. I don't think it's necessary. I'm cognizant of my environment. Don't get me wrong, but I don't think I need to have security everywhere I go, and certainly didn't need one coming to see you today, right? Because I think you're fairly harmless.
Absolutely.
But no, I'm just kidding. Yeah.
And that is so true, because it doesn't matter where I live. I never am afraid to be around my environment.
I sense that about you.
I'm not stupid, but I am at home with, I always say, my people, with anywhere I am at. I'm comfortable.
And that's amazing, an amazing aspect about you. And I know that you're interviewing me, but intuitively speaking, I would say you're not originally from Gary.
No, not at all.
And how long have you been here?
Almost, it's coming up to a year.
Really?
Really?
Now, I thought it was even longer than that because of your familiarity and the way that you've embraced the community. And that's absolutely commendable, but that's in your spirit.
Yes.
Right. That's great.
Because I believe that it doesn't matter where you live. You have to take pride in where you live.
Absolutely.
And you have to get involved. It's not okay to just sit back and criticize and be a naysayer and discredit. You have to be active.
Sure.
You have to be active, because what I want for myself, I want for my brothers and sisters, I want for the people around me, especially for the kids.
It's the true meaning of compassion. Absolutely.
You know? So that's why I do the things that I do. And I feel I get that sense from you as a mayor when I see you interact and out there and do. I know that you're doing the things because you feel that it's necessary and it's needed.
That's a large part of it. Now, you know, listen, you've made me out to be some kind of saint, and let's take this halo off of my head.
I can only go by my observation, because I don't know you personally. But what I see, you know, my grandmother always says, you know, you do what you do in the house, but when you exit that house, it's what people see and what you represent.
Sure. Sure.
You know, so I'm looking at what I see you represent.
Our grandmothers must have come from the same school of thought, but no, really, you're absolutely right. Yep.
Because none of us are saints. Because I'm not a saint.
Sure.
Either. You know, we've all had our ways and do our things, certain things, but it's what we represent once we make a decision to do that.
Absolutely.
And it's a job. It's not even about a title. It's about doing what's right. It's about doing what's needed, because it's not about me. I always think it's about the person that needs it.
I agree. Yep.
Absolutely. So before we wrap this up, I want to touch on a couple of subjects. I know that you've been married for
40 years.
40 years. To
just rolls off my tongue.
You better.
Right.
For our first lady, Deanna.
Deanna.
And she has been dealing with cancer. Can I say that?
Yes, you can. You absolutely can.
How has that been for you? And I know how it is for her, but how has that been for you in your position as a mayor, as a husband, as a father, to see the one that you love? Go through that.
So thank you for the question.
Mm-hmm.
For a number of reasons, because just discussing it helps me to be even a little bit stronger. And I'm going to hold it together to answer this, which I tell you, a couple of weeks ago, I don't know that I would have been able to, right? You know, and in different times, it's, you know, different reactions. But in any event, she was diagnosed September the 13th of last year. And it's been quite a journey for her. And it's one that what I've learned is a permanent part of your life for now. And so I don't know that either of us have really come to grips with it. But what I can tell you is we are certainly a lot better off than we were in September. We understand more about it. But you started off asking, can you talk about it? And I agreed, because from the beginning, we've been very public about it, right? It's not a punishment, right? It's not anything that anyone should be embarrassed about. And in fact, it's something that African Americans and Latinos need to speak about a little bit more. And I've learned this at least over the last 5 months or so, based on her diagnosis, right? And just what we've learned about that. So she has triple negative breast cancer. There's all sorts of or various forms of it. But triple negative is by far the most aggressive form. It impacts African Americans and Latinos at disproportionate numbers than any other race. And it's has a high rate of reoccurrence. And the prognosis is one that certainly causes you to pause and just think about where you are and certainly the future. But the reason it's such a detrimental and just really a difficult diagnosis to receive is because triple negative, as I understand it, does not have any receptors that the doctors can specifically target. And so they have all sorts of medicine and advancements in medicine. In fact, she's got a great doctor over at University of Chicago, and treatment seems to be going fairly well, but it's tough on her. It's absolutely, in fact, last week was really tough for her. And it's moments like that that really just make you appreciate the moment. And certainly, you know, look forward to the future and a day when she doesn't have to have the experiences from or the side effects that she has. But I gotta tell you, and this makes me smile to think about it, she is the strongest person. And I thought my drill instructors and my mother, hell, I think I'm strong, but she is by far the strongest person that I've ever met in my life. And I say that because I haven't seen her be any different than she is and ordinarily is since the diagnosis, right? And in fact, she's determined to live. She's certainly determined to battle this. And we've been together 40 years, actually 41. We've been married 40. But the point is we're going to continue to pursue this together also. And in the interim, if we can share information with anyone and help someone else to understand, or either just be a source of encouragement
Absolutely.
or inspiration for someone who encounters a similar fate or anything remotely similar, then again, we believe that we will have done something that's greater than both of us. And that's the way that we're approaching it. And so today she's well. She went to work today.
Really?
And she's smiling.
Really?
And she starts her second phase of treatment this Friday. And listen, I'm glad I talked a little bit longer because we celebrated our 40th anniversary on February the 4th, the day before our actual anniversary day. And we sent out invitations in that, and we asked people that if they wanted to contribute, that it be cash only, but to direct it to the University of Chicago triple negative breast cancer research. We were able to raise $10,000.
Really?
And in this Friday, we'll be presenting that to the University of Chicago and specifically the doctor who's caring for her to further the research.
That
and
is
so
amazing.
It is. But this has become, it's part of our life, but we aren't focusing on the negative aspects on it and how it impacts us as much as we are how we might be able to help somebody else, if that makes sense to you.
Yes, it makes sense because, and that is so, strength comes from that. Beside just that prayer does, because God can change anything. I truly believe that, the power of prayer. But I love it when people take tragedy, when we take any kind of tragedy or mishap and turn it into something positive.
Sure.
Like I do with my son. It's because it gives you that strength and it gives you a reason to live because, that's beautiful.
Sure.
That is beautiful. So I definitely understand what you were saying from there.
Yeah, well, thanks for just giving me an opportunity to talk about it. And again, the more I verbalize it, the stronger I become. And I'm certainly she does also.
Yes.
Again, not from myself, but to be there for her and then to share with someone else.
That's amazing. Thank you for being a good husband.
Thank you.
And so we are in the year 2023. You've been the mayor of Gary, Indiana for almost 4 years, right? Coming up to 4 years.
3 years, 1 month, 28 days. But who's counting?
Yes. And since you've been in office, what are some of the things, and I can read it, but I just have you talk about it. What are some of the things that you have done to formulate, to make for change, that formulates changes in Gary?
So, that's always or often a difficult question for me because, I focus on all the things that need to be done. And so, this is a reflection of it. But as I go back and I look at the things that my team has compiled of the things that we were actually able to achieve, this pales in comparison to what? So the irony of it for me is oftentimes I don't think about it as that way. And it's sort of difficult for me to replay it because I'm always focusing on what needs to be done still. And there's so much that needs to be done. And oftentimes, even though, a lot of these conditions and challenges have existed well before I became the mayor, once I took the oath of office of becoming the mayor, I embraced all of this as if it is my responsibility because ultimately I feel that it is in some regards. And so, but I think some of the most significant impacts that we've been able to have all been surrounded around the type of environment that we want to see. And it sort of speaks to our general mantra of reimagining Gary. I want us to just think about our city the way that it can be, the way that it should be, and maybe even think of some of the experiences that you've had when you travel to other places and you see different entities or amenities that exist. I believe we can have that here. And if we consider our geographic location, then we're certainly primed to do so. And so our overall goal and vision is to absolutely make Gary not only appear to be, but actually be the safest community that we could possibly imagine. We want to do that for the residents that live here, certainly for the people who conduct business here, but also those who visit, because the other side of that vision is we believe that this could be a destination city because of its proximity and the amenities that we have. But also, looking towards the future and thinking about persons like Jamal's generation and those coming after him. We know that Gary has a tremendous opportunity to become a technology hub also. If for no other reason, we believe that we have a responsibility to do so in order to prepare for opportunities for the generations of the future. And that's what we continue to work on.
Absolutely. You know, I hear you say the possibility of technology, and that's amazing. That's a beautiful thought for the younger generation, because in my mind, I hear so much about factory, but we're not in the factory industry as much anymore, and it is technology. And I do agree that that is an awesome vision for Gary, for the future of Gary.
Well, I believe
part of it.
Gary's always going to have a footprint, or at least an existence of some type of manufacturing.
Absolutely.
But I believe, and if for no other reason, because again, it's proximity of being at the crossroads of America, as they say. But what we definitely can see, as a trend, and certainly is going to be more prevalent in the future, is the introduction of artificial technology, or artificial, what do you call it? AI, artificial information, right? So the point I make is, whether it's manufacturing or something as simple as a trucking job, or in many instances medicine, or your grocery stores, we believe that technology is going to be present in every aspect of our life, and it's only going to increase. We believe that we need to prepare our future generations to be able to embrace those opportunities that exist. Absolutely. And to thrive as well. And so
absolutely. There is no doubt that I support you for re-election. Because I would like to see, this is my opinion, I would like for you to have the opportunity to finish what I see you have started. When I moved to Gary, it was right on the middle way for coronavirus. So, everything was shut down. But what I knew was there was great services here. When a lot of the stuff I saw on the news wasn't happening in Gary. Or we can't get this, or we can't get that, or we can't, we're running low on food, or we're the vaccine, everything. The service that Gary gave during COVID was outstanding.
Well, there's a reason for that. And fortunately, we have the fortune and the luxury of being one of only a couple of communities in Northwest Indiana that actually has a health department with a health director. And so I recall somewhere right around the beginning of January, when the reports of COVID were becoming more prevalent across the country, you'd see the news and you'd look at the map and see the dots. I remember a specific conversation with Dr. Walker, and what I asked him to do at that particular time is to explore this to the greatest extent that he could, to get in touch with the state and to have us prepared in the event we do experience a case, and my specific words were, at the moment the first case hits Lake County,
yes,
and not Gary, just Lake County, period, I wanted to have protocol in place in order to help protect our people. And so as a result, we were the first community in Northwest Indiana to establish protocol before it even hit our city. And I think that gave us a jump start. And what you witnessed and exhibited, or what you witnessed being exhibited, was that in action. And so the weekly COVID updates and the ability to connect with the providers who had different services, whether it be food or vaccinations, we were always a step ahead of the curve. And to that extent, I believe, oftentimes people, or sometimes anyway, say that, well, COVID's over, so you can't talk about that anymore. And that's just an excuse for the condition of the city. I'm not using it as an excuse. It's a fact. The world was shut down, and that includes the city, for approximately 18 months. But something else came good out of that also, and that was the American Rescue Plan Act, in which the city of Gary received almost $81 million. And I believe that within itself gave us an opportunity to rebound a little faster. And we still have a significant portion of those resources because we're approaching it with a very thoughtful and open mind, and trying to get the greatest benefit for the most amount of people with the resources that we've received.
Absolutely. Because I remember, I'm telling you, rents were being paid, light bills were being paid. You know what I mean? I was a recipient of trying to get some help on the rent during the COVID, and I did, and it didn't take months or long like it was happening in all the states.
Sure.
So I appreciate that. And that comes from leadership.
Thank you.
And I said, that must be the military training. That's the military training. Always be prepared.
Well, I tell everybody, the military was a great experience. I'm certain I learned many valuable lessons, but I would say the first drill instructor I had was my mother, right? and so to that extent, very regimented, structured, and always strived for the best.
Yes, I'm sure my kids would probably say the same thing about me.
I'm sure.
So I'm looking at, I love this. This is re-elect Jerome A. Prince for mayor. And I know that you're doing a lot of things around the city. One of the things is weekly bingo on Broadway, which is fun to me to see. People come in there and have fun, play bingo or play cards.
It's an opportunity to have a little fun, and it gets people out because, I guess when you consider what plays out on a national stage, I would imagine that there are a number of people who've lost interest and a taste for government or politics simply because of the way it's being executed. But to that extent, it's a way to further get the message out. It's a way to bring people out, right? Because they want to have a good time, might win a prize, a television or something like that. But it's just a great time to be there and to communicate and socialize with people. And, sometimes there's even a few hot dogs in that, and they can break bread
chili
a little
dogs.
bit. Yeah, right.
Which is fun, I'm excited. I'm actually, this is the first time, I've been so close to being a part of, like, I think a change. I feel the change, and I'm excited. I'm excited for this re-election for you. I want to claim it for you. This is my opinion. Everyone knows who this is. Sandra. I believe that this is, in my opinion, that you deserve to get this chance to complete the vision that you have. And if we all come together and everyone supports you in what you see for Gary, I think it can be done. It's not an overnight thing, as we know. Nothing happens overnight.
Yeah, well,
and there are steps.
I clearly agree with you. I've been around long enough to know that unfortunately that's not the case, you know, and in many regards, I think that continues or at least contributes to the city being held back. But listen, it's the nature of this arena. There's always going to be people who believe they can do it better, whether that's their genuine intent or belief, or, you know, if politics is the prevailing factor, it is what it is. And so what we're going to continue to do is just focus on the job. I mean, naturally, we're going to run the greatest campaign we can, but we're going to focus on the job, right? And I believe, and it's certainly been my experience, that by doing so, the people that you represent, those who care to or take the time to at least look at it with an objective eye, they feel and witness that also. And that, to me, is the greatest contribution towards being reelected or even attaining office. It's not necessarily the pie in the sky or the things that you say you're going to do. I think the best indicator of who I am and the type of leader I am are the things that I've done as an elected official, and certainly prior to holding office either also.
Yes, absolutely. I absolutely agree with that. Once again, I want to thank you for doing this interview with me, for being honest and to just telling some things that we may not have known about, you know?
Yeah.
And I thank you. I want to read this to you. This here, when I lost my son, as you know, he was a young Marine. I found this in his wallet. And I want to read it to you because you are a Marine also. Once a Marine, always a Marine.
Absolutely.
It says honor, integrity, responsibility, accountability, courage. Do the right thing in the right way for the right reason. Commit, devotion to the Corps and my fellow Marine. And in the back, it says, Marines, obey the law, lead by example, respect themselves and others, maintain a high standard of integrity, support and defend the Constitution, uphold special trust and confidence, place faith and honor above all else. Honor fellow Marines, the Corps, country, and family. I thank you for your service.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Not just to the military, but for the city of Gary, Indiana.
Thank you. It's humbling. I appreciate it. And I'm going to try to do my best to certainly deserve and earn the respect that you've given me today, and certainly that you continue to give me by supporting this administration and our future reelection. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you once again for watching Let's Talk with Sandra. I hope that you enjoyed this show. Please, as always, comment, subscribe, and I'll ask you, support our mayor for re-election. Peace and love.
Watch your aura pass me by, losing balance. What if we run out of time and second chances? Empty-handed.